Welcome back to another episode of Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is once again the one and only Rob McConnell. Folks, there's two major stories that have been making the news lately, and as you know on this show, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal. That's a lot of subjects. So let's get caught up real quickly on the two big stories, the first one of which is the recent summit between American President Donald Trump and the dictator of communist North Korea, Kim Jong-un. And we will update about that. Then we'll talk about the other bombshell that dropped today, which was highly anticipated one way or another. And that is the new Inspector General report released by the Department of Justice, looking into how the FBI investigated Hillary Clinton's undeniable, let's be blunt about it, email scandal. All right, let's talk about North Korea and the United States. Now, let's back up a little bit here. We must remember that the history between the United States and communist North Korea has never been one of brotherly love, let's just put it that way. There was a war, of course, that happened in the 1950s known as the Korean War, and the war was never officially ended. Instead, an armistice was reached, and both North Korea and South Korea have remained in a perpetual state of war since then, although there has not been a military invasion since the signing of the armistice. But there was never a formal end to the war. Now, fast forward all these decades later, and you must remember that it was after the terrorist attacks of 9/11 against the United States by the Islamo-fascist terrorist group Al-Qaeda that North Korea was identified by then President George Bush as being part of an axis of evil, quote unquote. It was at that time included Iran, of course, and also in the eyes of George Bush, Iraq, and even Libya. You know, there was more than just three countries, actually. Bush had his list of what he called rogue states, and North Korea was one of them. And we must remember that it was during the presidency of George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, that the North Korea went nuclear, actually became a nuclear power, a rogue nuclear power, and no attempt to negotiate with North Korea, as including sanctions to penalize them for conducting rogue nuclear weapons tests, seems to have worked or reined them in. And all these decades afterwards, you have Donald Trump, who is the president. He holds a summit, the first summit ever between an American president and a leader of communist North Korea. They hold their summit in Singapore. And if you believe the hyperbole, which is on the vague side, let's be honest, coming out of the Trump White House, it looks like there's going to be peace in the Korean Peninsula going forward. It is going to be denuclearized, quote unquote, if you believe what the White House is saying. The problem with what the White House is doing, and it's kind of inherent in the dynamics of where the political issue is between the two countries right now, of everything involving North Korea, it is expected that there would be vagaries so early in the game because it is early in the game. But I want to back up a little bit, and I want to talk about the disgusting polarization that continues among people around the world regarding everything Trump does. You know, it's reached the point that if Trump were to be seen and filmed by, say, CNN, his favorite network, walking across water like Jesus Christ did, there are enough cynics out there, including CNN, who would say it's just because Trump can't swim. That's why he walked on water. Rather than praise him for being able to walk on water, like a human being cannot do under normal circumstances, they would say, well, it's because he doesn't know how to swim. In other words, no matter what Trump does, it's wrong, it's bad, the world's ending, yada, yada, yada. Well, I have to tell Trump haters, and they are haters are extremists by definition. The subject is just a formality. It's not that simple. There are good things that Trump does. There are plenty of bad things, wrong things. It's a mixed bag. First of all, you have to understand why he sits in the White House and why Hillary Clinton does not. Despite what Hillary Clinton says, it was her fault and the Democrats that they lost the election. Even Hillary herself said many, many times during her own campaign, why am I not 20, 30 points ahead? She has a very valid point. And if you look at the dynamics of the presidential election, they were truly unprecedented in American history. Briefly, they were this. Here you had Donald Trump, a person who's controversial, doesn't have a good reputation exactly in certain business circles, has been through a couple of bankruptcies, likes to market himself as a very successful businessman, very powerful business name, etc. Again, you've got a mixed bag in there. You've got indictments in the past for racism. He was actually settled out of court over that with the U.S. government, overcharging different rents based on what race the tenants were. You had his bankruptcies with casinos. You had Trump associates having connections with different mafias, including those in Russia. Again, you've got a mixed bag here. But the point is, this individual, Donald Trump, ran for president against nearly 24 Republican opponents, the cream of the Republican Party, and he won. Not only did he win, he beat the nearest Republican opponent, the joke known as Senator Ted Cruz, by about 2-1 margin. It wasn't even close. And then the party tried to still not give him the nomination. Mitt Romney tried a last-minute coup, which failed, thankfully. And the process of electing at least the party nominee within the Republican Party followed procedure. Trump won it fair and square, and he became the nominee. And then the Hillary Clinton campaign was beside themselves with joy. In fact, it was Barack Obama, ironically, and the Democrats who, they got their wish, encouraged Donald Trump to run for president. Well, you know what the old classic adage says, be careful what you wish for, because you may get it. Well, Trump did run for president, and contrary to what Obama said, he won, and he sits in the White House now. And the reason Hillary Clinton lost is because just enough Americans don't like her. They don't like what she represents, and they don't like the Democratic National Party. They don't like the liberal la mentality. They don't like pandering politics. They don't believe in being politically correct. A whole bunch of things that you can criticize the Democrats for because they've earned it. On the other hand, most Americans will admit in the polls, when you ask them, that their overall ideology of how they feel about national defense, how they feel about medical care, how they feel about the economy, how they feel about big business and unions and wages and labor laws and so on. The majority of Americans overwhelmingly identify with what should be called or can credibly be called a Democratic Party ideology. Yet here you have most Americans identifying more naturally with the Democrats than the Republicans, especially the conservatives. Most Americans do not belong to the far religious right. They never will. They never have, at least not for centuries. And yet, despite that fact, the Democrats have lost every election for the last several elections in a row. In fact, the Democrats are so talented that when they had their supermajority, when Barack Obama was elected, they controlled the White House, the Senate, and the Congress. They were so talented that 2 years later, they lost Congress. Then they lost the Senate. Yes, Obama did win re-election, but they lost the Senate and the House, and then eventually the White House. The Republicans, or the Democrats right now, are so weak politically that you'd have to go back to the time of roughly the Civil War to see them this inept. And yet, there they are. And it seems that their strategy now, since they still can't figure out what they want to be when they grow up, is anything but Trump. That's it. And that's the same strategy that the Republicans had against Obama. Just say no. And the Democrats rightfully labeled the Republicans as a party of no. Well, now the Democrats own that title, and it is disgraceful to be the party of no across the board. Instead, you should be saying no to certain issues that deserve a no, and you should be saying yes to certain issues that deserve a yes. Now, I will tell you point blank, because I'm just that kind of guy, that I don't have a personal horse in this race. Yes, I do criticize Hillary Clinton. I've written a book exposing her. I wrote it only because she had the nerve to write her book, What Happened, which we're being told this is why she lost. The book is full of a bunch of lies. I've proven that in my own book, exposing her, What Didn't Happen, which you can get on the iTunes bookstore or Apple Books. And it exposes her false claim, at least one of them, as to why she lost. And the only reason I did that book is because Hillary Clinton has lied repeatedly about why she lost. And if we're going to learn anything about this election, we can only learn by facing the facts, even if we don't like them. Now, I did predict that Donald Trump would win the election over Hillary. That bothered me, not because I wanted Hillary to be president. I did not. I also didn't want Trump to be president. To be honest, I don't support either the Democrats and I don't support the Republicans, never have, because I know and can prove historically that these are the two parties that are only responsible for the current problems the United States faces. And they are considerable, and they must be addressed and solved soon. Otherwise, the country is going to further implode to the point where it can be unstable within its own self, meaning, as Abraham Lincoln famously said a long time ago, America will never be defeated from the outside. Instead, it will be defeated from within. That was Lincoln's biggest fear, and he was right, and he was president during the American Civil War. Well, what's happening now politically is the country has become the divided states of America, and we need both parties to start doing their jobs. And if they don't do their jobs, they need to be tossed out and replaced by politicians from whatever party that will. We'll be back after this commercial break.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV. Plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
We live in rapidly shifting times of extreme volatility and uncertainty. Such profound change brings a unique opportunity for the evolution of consciousness. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, host of Mission Evolution Radio Show, a program that explores the latest scientific developments and deepening spiritual truths supporting human evolution. Join me on xzbn.net, where I interview leading experts in science, physics, medicine, spirituality, and more. By applying divergent viewpoints to leading-edge topics, we uncover expansive and evolutionary truth to assist you on your path to enlightenment. More information and past episodes are available at missionevolution.org.
Welcome back to segment 2 here on Cal's Corner Radio Show on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is, once again, the one and only Rob McConnell. Now, we're talking about the summit between North Korea and the United States. Again, it was held in Singapore against the backdrop of really unprecedented political dynamics. First of all, you have the fact that there is a summit being held in the first place. And let's talk about that for a moment. When Trump announced that he was interested in holding a summit with communist North Korea, he was condemned by Trump haters because Trump haters hate Trump. They're going to condemn everything he does. That's understood. Where there is hypocrisy, though, is on the side of the Republicans. Now, they're supposed to support Trump. According to polls, Trump is almost as popular among the Republicans or GOP as President Ronald Reagan was. In other words, there's a lot of love between the two. The Republicans are honest. They understand that without Trump, they wouldn't even be in the White House. That has to be a bit bittersweet for them, but that's the reality. They understand the politics of it. They have all the power right now. Of course, they want to keep it. But as I've also pointed out, the Republicans are dumb enough to give the Democrats help to make a comeback in the midterms. If the Democrats can also help get their act together and come up with a better ground game, they could actually regain the Senate or maybe Congress or maybe both, but of course not the White House for another couple years. So this dynamic has been going on. And in the past, when Obama said, I would be willing to meet with our enemies, anytime, he talked about terrorist groups, he even included North Korea in that statement. He was condemned by the Republicans for wanting to meet with such types because that would show weakness. It doesn't show weakness. It shows leadership, folks. Come on, be obvious about this. And yet years later, now that Trump says he's going to meet with the leader of North Korea, some of these same Republicans are saying, oh, this is great. This is historic. This is unprecedented. This is more evidence that Trump is awesome. No, it's more evidence that you're a hypocrite. The United States does have a policy. It's a formal policy that you don't negotiate with terrorists. But in reality, in history, that has not always been true. Let's be blunt. Even Israel talks to Hamas on occasion. In fact, they talk fairly often. It's one of the reasons Israel is able to help contain Hamas. Just a few days ago, Israel destroyed a underwater terrorist tunnel that Hamas had managed to dig going out to the sea. They had no idea it existed. It was there to help infiltrate Hamas's frogman terrorists. They destroyed that tunnel and some other facilities. One of the reasons they were able to do that is because Israel is in communication on different levels with Hamas. So while formally there may not be any official negotiations or whatever, even Trump admitted that there were backdoor negotiations, backdoor discussions, and they eventually led to this summit. So when people criticize any American president for wanting to meet with an enemy to try to find peace, that is wrong. Unless the conditions for that meeting are so draconian that they are not justifiable, you have to meet with an enemy in order to try to achieve peace. That is just a lesson from history, and it's common sense. Does it mean that the meeting is going to be fun and enjoyable? It's going to be a big party. It's going to be palpable? Absolutely not. That's a whole different set of issues. But the idea that you don't hold any discussions is just stupid. I'm being blunt with you. So they hold this summit. They sign this document. It promises, in theory, a bunch of great stuff to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. Trump even says he's canceling the military exercises. He even admitted they were provocative. Now, that's debatable. He even said he wants to bring home tens of thousands of American soldiers who are stationed in South Korea. Then there was the issue of this video, which in my mind was a bit rather curious. At least there had never been a video that I'm aware of that was prepared by the U.S. government, shown to another foreign leader, at least quite the way this one was. You can go onto YouTube, folks, and you can actually search for the video that Trump showed the Korean dictator, North Korean dictator. It's a video that talks about, economic prosperity. It shows hotels, it shows beaches. It's the kind of thing that you would expect from a real estate organization or some private company. I've never seen anything like it. Doesn't mean it wasn't effective, doesn't mean it didn't work. Who knows? It's still too early to tell. That video and what it contained has been mocked. I understand some of those criticisms. On the other hand, those who are criticizing it as saying it's a bit loopy, they're not the ones involved in trying to make it work or deliver on its promises. So as the old adage goes, you can't know what it's like to be in another person's shoes until you walk in them. I would say that that applies to the current critics of this video. What the world needs to do is just step back and give this process the time required, the time that is necessary to see it run its proper course. Either we're going to have the wonderful stuff that President Trump has been promising, at least in his early comments, or they're not going to happen, or maybe only a certain percentage of them will. But as we have discussed in a previous show, because we've talked about North Korea a couple of times now, there was one time in a past episode here on the show where we specifically mentioned some of the issues that will have to be dealt with. If North Korea is going to reunify, for example, with South Korea, who's going to be the leader of Korea? Who knows? We've talked about that before. Nobody knows. Does this mean that there will be no nuclear weapons at all? The South Korea doesn't have any. The United States pulled out all of its nuclear weapons a long time ago from the South Korean peninsula. Or does it mean that there will be the nuclear weapons, but they'll be under international monitoring? Therefore, they can never be used in war. Who knows? Who knows if they could even pull that off? I would say at this point that if I had to declare a so-called winner in what is going on in Korea, let's assume that Trump's promises actually come true in the future. The overall winner is not only going to be pretty much the entire world, but if I had to name one country that benefits more than anybody from this, it would have to be North Korea itself and, of course, Communist China. And let me tell you why. First of all, we know what happens from history when more prosperous societies come into contact with those that are not as advanced or not as prosperous. What tends to happen is that the better societies, for lack of a better term, tend to dominate and eventually win. Now, there's precedent for this. Let's talk about some recent precedent real quickly. Look at the Cold War. When communism started to fall in Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia and in East Germany, it fell like dominoes. Literally every month, another communist regime fell in those times. And what happened is when some economic prosperity, which was the lack of economic prosperity was the main cause of the failure of communism, it simply consumed itself, imploded. What would happen is if free contact were allowed between South Korea or other parts of the world and North Korea, it would cause instability problems for the communist regime in North Korea, because the reason it survives in its current form is because it is not in contact with most of the world. What's going to happen when people, potential investors, want to start their newspapers over there? Would the Communist Party allow that? Absolutely not. Or it would have to change or cease being communist as it always has been. This is kind of obvious. I mean, look at China. How many free newspapers are in China today? The answer is zero. It's all controlled by the government. Google doesn't exist in China because the government won't allow it. They made conditions so bad for Google, especially through hacking and industrial espionage, that Google pulled out, cut their losses. Facebook does not exist in China, at least legally. Again, China won't let it exist. They have their own version of that, okay? So what China wants is for North Korea to essentially be a carbon copy of itself. What the communist Chinese love is they love capitalism, even though they officially don't. But their version of communism isn't so pure. There never has really been a true communist country in the history of the human race. because communism can't work. Let's be blunt about it. So there has never been a true communist system because it's not possible. It's like saying, let's have a unicorn for president. It's never going to happen. So what you have is you have China, which is really a totalitarian capitalist system. It stays in power by brute force. Yes, it throws their people a bone by giving them a job, by helping with their economic and material prosperity, much better than the average Russian had it under the former Soviet Union, no question. But the Chinese government remains in power because it uses oppressive, even murderous violence and force to stay in power. It denies basic freedoms of speech. There are more people now in prisons in China than any other country in the world. And of course, they have this new social credit system where if you don't behave the right way, you don't watch the right programs on TV, you don't listen to the right shows on the radio, you don't spend enough time studying the party literature. Instead, you're spending time on your Xbox, or maybe you're watching some adult movies or doing whatever you want to do instead of what the party wants you to do. You will be penalized under this social credit system in China, denied basic rights, including the right to travel, hold a job, get a loan, get a mortgage, take the subway, take the bus, take a flight. There are already people being penalized for this because in China they want to control everything. And this is why they've started this new system. North Korea does the same thing, but it uses less finesse methods. It uses more brute force because it's a smaller country, much smaller. And we'll be back after this break to continue to talk about what North Korea will be planning. We'll be right back.
From our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond, you're watching the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Den.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world, interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to segment 3 here on Kal's Corner radio show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. So what North Korea has to do is it has to figure out how it's going to coexist with the rest of the world. It's not like it has a lot of experience doing that. It doesn't, okay? In fact, the biggest benefactor or patron, if you will, for North Korea for many years was the former Soviet Union. When it imploded in 1991, the Chinese stepped in and filled that vacuum. They've been using and fueling communist North Korea for their own aims since then, in the same way that China uses Pakistan to poke India in the eye and further its agenda there. So what North Korea has to do is it has to figure out how to get along with the rest of the world. Its leadership wants to stay in power, like all leadership does. On the other hand, how is it going to do that and try to westernize or liberalize or modernize or start imposing or allowing some freedoms? It can't have it both ways, and that's going to be a big challenge. And then there's the issue of, should the communist regime fall in North Korea, what kind of regime would take its place? Would it be one driven mostly by South Koreans? Would it be jointly administered by North and Southern Koreans? Would they be real Democrats? Would they be social Democrats? Would they be liberals, conservatives? Who knows? There's no way to predict this. The interesting thing about what is going to happen now is that the world is literally at the crossroads of its existence regarding what it's going to do or not do with communist North Korea. We know that the status quo cannot continue. There would be war. That would be the logical, inevitable, and actually logical outcome. You can't have a country, whether it's North Korea or any other nation, doesn't matter. You can't have them threaten other nations and threaten to wipe them out with their nuclear weapons, continue to build those nuclear weapons, target that country, continue to conduct tests. It just cannot be allowed to happen. So we know that the status quo cannot continue. On the other hand, what does that mean? Other than the obvious that it has to change, it means there's going to have to be compromise on all sides, including from the United States as well as the Chinese. Now, what's interesting about this is that years ago, there was a leak of a document by WikiLeaks. Now, this was during the time when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. And I'm not picking on poor Hillary. She's not poor, for one. But secondly, I'm not picking on her. But it was during the time that she was on top of things and supposedly in charge that a memo leaked where the Chinese leadership at that time told the United States and some colleagues, third-party countries, that they would be willing to consider the reunification of the two Koreas. And what was interesting is the Chinese not only agreed to have North Korea and South Korea reunite, they agreed that Seoul, which is in South Korea, not North Korea, would be the capital of a reunified Korea. It always has been, or was. And that it would basically be a free democracy, essentially unchanged from what South Korea is today. The U.S. would not have a military presence there, which would, of course, delight the Chinese. And what the Chinese seem to care about most, based on this memo and some other communications, was that China become the de facto economic kingpin in the area. Now, think about this for a minute. It makes sense. Again, there's no question that communist China, so-called communist China, loves to make money. They have an economy almost as big as the U.S.'s. And if they become the de facto economic power, which they would in that area, so-called Korea would be its main trading partner, other than the U.S., which is not in that area. And, of course, Japan would be another power too, but China and Japan are not exactly best friends. A lot of hard feelings over the decades of hostility between those two countries, especially since World War II. And what was interesting about this memo is that the Chinese were basically willing to throw North Korea under the bus in exchange for making what essentially would be, over time, trillions and trillions of dollars. Now, assuming that those talks years ago from the Communist Chinese were sincere and that they are still thinking this way, or at least open to this way, this may be how the North Korean issue is solved. It may be that the Communist Party just fades out like they have in other countries, and then it becomes essentially an extension of what is now South Korea, except for all of Korea. And then China ends up becoming the main economic power. The U.S. would come in there and help initially at first, but most of the area, at least in Korea, especially in what is North Korea today, would be essentially ceded to the Chinese and Chinese sphere of influence, if you will. America would be in there, but not the way it is in South America or South Korea. So this is one possibility of how things could be handled. Now, there's another issue, too. The U.S. is going to want some sort of security guarantee for this new Korea. What's to keep China from coming across the border and invading it and gobbling it up anytime it wants to? Well, technically nothing other than Chinese will. So the U.S. would probably want, along the border with this new United Korea, some sort of buffer zone or some limit on Chinese troops and the kinds of military personnel and weaponry that would be stationed in the area. This is especially true if the United States is going to withdraw its troops and not have a permanent base in South Korea, which under a unified Korea scenario would likely be the case. So bottom line is you have people who are hesitant to give Trump his credit for what he's done. It is important that the two leaders of North Korea and the United States have met. What that means going forward, only a genuine psychic would know. And since I don't believe there is such a person, we all won't know until time plays itself out. What is interesting is that whatever is going to happen is going to be sooner rather than later. Everyone agrees the status quo cannot continue. Even North Korea seems to agree to that. So this is a very exciting time, and we should wish for the best, try to work for the best, strive for the best. Even if you hate Donald Trump, wish him success and the best, and even wish goodwill and success towards the leader of North Korea if it delivers what is being promised. If it doesn't, then it looks like it's going to be war. That seems to be the only way that this can pan out one way or another. All right, let's switch now talking to a different subject, which is a little more recent than the summit, which was a couple days ago. This is the recent Inspector General report that came out today, ironically on Trump's birthday, regarding the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton's email scandal. Now, I want to say something about Hillary Clinton's email scandal real quick. If I had a dime for every time a Hillary Clinton supporter criticizes me for saying, you can't say Hillary Clinton email scandal, that's wrong, you're being biased. I'm sorry, these people are out to lunch. They need to look up the definition of what the word scandal means. I'm not going to do it for them. It is a scandal because Hillary Clinton lied repeatedly about her use of an email server, a private email server, and she even lied about why she used it. Okay? Now, it's not just my opinion. It is an established fact. In fact, a previous Inspector General report released the year of the presidential election by the U.S. State Department proved that Hillary Clinton lied when she said that she had permission to use a private email server. Not only did she never have permission, the Inspector General proved in their report that if she had bothered asking, and she did not, she would have been told no. She would have been told no because it was wrong, it violated policy, and it violated security requirements. Now, I know a lot of people listening to this, probably most people are not, let's say, internet technical experts or computer experts, but for those who are not, most of the people listening to this probably have a Gmail account as well. That's Google Mail. Well, no commercial service, this includes Yahoo, Microsoft Mail. This includes Google. They're not secure. They do not meet the minimum security requirements that the U.S. government has for classified info. Now, there's many reasons why they don't. The main reason of which is they're not meant to contain or deal with classified info. They're not designed for that. So, there's not going to be any protections that way. But it is a fact that Hillary Clinton set up her own private email server. This was deliberate. The server did not configure itself. It didn't invent itself. And it did not meet the security requirements that somebody who is a member of a presidential cabinet, in this case Secretary of State, which a person who deals with a lot of classified emails, her email server did not meet those requirements. She did not ask for permission to use it. She violated her own State Department policies, and she even lied when she said she had permission. In fact, one of her predecessors, former Secretary of State Colin Powell, he called her out when she had lied and said that she had talked to Powell about it. What she didn't say is that she had talked to Powell about it a year after she'd been doing it. Of course, that's a typical Clinton doublespeak there, and that is that they tell you a partial truth, not the full truth, or they don't give you the proper context. If I said to anybody, well, I talked to Colin Powell about it, had no problems, you would think, oh, I had permission. But if I say I talked to him about it a year after I was already doing it, that's a whole different important context that Clinton left out, that the Inspector General and Colin Powell nailed her on. So yes, it is a scandal. Did it cost her the election? No. Was it a factor? Yes. But I remind people who try to blame her failure to win the White House on the email server that they're not paying attention to the reality of the facts about her campaign. We'll be back to talk about those after the commercial break.
Heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howell expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
The concept of a new age has been around since the late 19th century, yet much of its original meaning has been lost. What exactly is the new age? Is it a religion, a collection of obscure esoteric practices, a series of doomsday predictions, or an astrological event? The New Age Chronicles is a unique, complementary publication bringing reason and grounded information to separate fact from fiction. Chock full of valuable information to support you as we make the monumental shift into the new era. You won't want to miss a single innovative issue. The New Age Chronicles newspaper is coming soon to www.newagechronicles.com.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is once again Rob McConnell. So, regarding the issue of Hillary Clinton, you cannot say, unless you're not telling the truth, that the reason she lost the election to Donald Trump was because of her email scandal, it was because of James Comey, it was because of the Russians, etc. No, it wasn't any single reason, folks. One must remember that when Hillary Clinton entered the presidential race, she entered the race with the highest untrustworthy rating of all candidates. Throughout the entire election process, the battle, if you will, for the dubious title of the least trustworthy candidate was passed between her and Donald Trump. In fact, both of them ended up, by the time voters cast their ballots, within 2 points of each other, according to polls. So in the eyes of many people, the election was between two lousy choices. When I was in India and I talked about the election to people, including at the Daily World newspaper where I was doing reporting on it from, again, I stood out because I had predicted in India that Trump would win, and a lot of the Indian media said I was just being biased or dumb or whatever you want to call it. The answer is no. I actually was accurate in the prediction, and it's because I was in touch with enough of my fellow Americans where I could tell from the mood that voters were not going to accept Hillary Clinton as the agent of change for the only reason that matters. She never has been. She never will be. Nobody goes to the Clintons if they really want to change things in Washington, D.C. In fact, the Clintons have long been part of what has been the problem of establishment D.C. and what's called deep state. The Clintons have laughed all the way to the bank by simply, using this foundation they have essentially as a way to legally make a lot of money. And there's no crime involved there overall. In other words, look at it this way. The Clinton Foundation, when Hillary Clinton announced that she was running for president, had raked up millions of dollars in pledges. It took in millions of dollars when she was Secretary of State. But the moment she lost the election to Trump, the donations dried up. Gee, what an amazing coincidence, isn't it, folks? No, it's not. The Clintons are masters of the corrupt practice of pay to play. And that is wrong in politics, but the Clintons have been masters at it, probably better than anybody else. And it's about time that people woke up to that fact. And so enough American voters voted for Trump. He took the blue states, the handful of states in the Midwest that had always, over the last decades, voted reliably Democratic. In fact, Hillary took some of those states for granted. Her ego was so big that she didn't even bother campaigning in states like Wisconsin, and she had never won that state before. She lost it to Obama in 2008. She lost it to Bernie Sanders, even though he wasn't going to win the nomination. He still beat her. And then she lost it to Trump. And while there were people who were claiming that it was voter suppression that caused her to lose it in Wisconsin, that was a story that was never true, but yet it was a lie repeated by Hillary Clinton. It was based on a false claim by a company that her own super PAC hired, Civis Analytics, who claimed that voter suppression was responsible. What they had done is they had surveyed a different state, which was not Wisconsin, found evidence of voter suppression, auto-magically projected that onto Wisconsin and said, oh, same phenomenon must be occurring there. And no, it was a very different state. Wisconsin is not Michigan, never will be, and it's not Minnesota either. And of course, the voting dynamics as well as the issue of voter suppression or voter registration is very different from state to state. Anybody who's been in America knows that. So with Hillary Clinton and her email scandal, the FBI was criticized widely for the way they mishandled that investigation. And now we can easily show that, like past reporters such as myself have reported on this, that the FBI did not do the job they should have. In fact, the Inspector General has now come down heavy on the FBI. They're even recommending possible prosecution of 5 individuals now who are involved in the Clinton email investigation. And let me just highlight here a couple of paragraphs from this report. It's over 500 pages long, so it's not light reading. And again, it's only was released a couple hours ago. Let's talk about the issue of what James Comey, the former FBI director, had talked about regarding the issue of intent. Remember that he said in his statement as to why he didn't prosecute Hillary is because he didn't find any intent to do anything wrong, to break laws, etc. That's rather curious because in fact, it's like something out of the Twilight Zone, and I think I can prove it. Now, imagine if you're a seasoned politician like Hillary Clinton. You're not only a lawyer with a license, but you're married to Bill Clinton. You've been First Lady for 8 years in the White House, and you've had scandal after scandal, both real and imagined, from Whitewater to Lewinsky, you name it. Again, some are real, some are imagined. Some are the result of a right-wing conspiracy. She's right about that. But others are legit, like Monica Lewinsky scandal. And are you going to tell me with a straight face that if you're someone as seasoned as Hillary Clinton, who was a senator as well after she left the White House, that you don't know, you're not smart enough, you don't have an IQ high enough to know that if you use a private email server, it's not going to be as secure as one you would use from the government? Are you that stupid? Well, if you believe Hillary Clinton's lies, yeah, I guess she was that stupid. And anybody believing her story would have to be even more stupid. I'm just being blunt with you. Okay, so let's say you are that stupid and you set up a server in your bathroom, downstairs in your basement, in your house in New York. Do you think for a minute that nobody's going to try to hack it? Come on, hello. Especially when you become Secretary of State. Do you think for a minute that it's okay for you to use your own private computer for official State Department business, knowing that the data on that private server is not going to be in the hands of the government? Therefore, it cannot be subject to Freedom of Information Act requests, searches, or inquiries. Surely the Clintons had to know this. They know what FOIA is, the Freedom of Information Act. It's been around for decades. They've been the recipient of Freedom of Information Act requests. In fact, it was lawsuits trying to find documents that were not available on the official government servers because the Clintons were using their own private server that led to the New York Times finding out that she was even using a private email server. So thank God for these pesky little lawsuits that the Democrats don't like. They helped us discover the truth, and that is what's important. So when Comey said they had to establish intent, the law doesn't require that. In fact, the law, I'm looking at it here, it's section 793F1. It says that only gross negligence is required to prosecute somebody for misusing an email server like she did and having classified information on it, which we now know was hacked, at least one memo, by some other state actors. So Comey himself said that Clinton was reckless and careless. Well, the words he used to describe what she did was really a synonym for gross negligence. You couldn't say she was slightly negligible because she made a point to set up her own email server. And that point seems to be lost on Comey and the others who defend Clinton. They point to Secretary Colin Powell, who used his America Online account on occasion, not for classified info. But see, AOL is a service that already exists. He didn't set up that server. He just used his email address, and he didn't use it for classified info. And he said it was very rare. And he said at the time that even though the laws were less defined, it still was a no-no to do it the way Hillary did years later. Okay, in the case of Clinton, she doesn't use an existing email account. She sets up her own computer to do it. And unless its existence was discovered accidentally or through some other process, you'd never even know it existed. And therefore, it's not part of the FOIA requirements to be searched. In fact, under FOIA laws, so that the documents can be part of public record, they're not supposed to be kept on such a private email server. So she broke the laws. So when Comey said we couldn't find any evidence of intent, well, I would argue that gross negligence is when somebody sets up a server. It's like leaving your lock unlocked at the door at night, or leaving the bank vault open and then leaving for the night. It's gross negligence. So if she had set up an existing account somewhere that she'd been using for years, one could argue, okay, well, there wasn't maybe that degree of negligence, but there was still negligence. But to set up a server and control everything for the purpose of getting out of being scrutinized and not having to comply with FOIA laws is not only gross negligence, it is deliberate intent. So when Comey later tried to justify his decision to speak up and say they had found additional emails by Anthony Weiner on his laptop, Weiner, of course, being the disgraced congressman who's married to Hillary Clinton's closest aide, Huma Abedin, Comey says in the interview with the Inspector General that he had two doors to go through as far as he was concerned. One was called Speak, and the other was called Conceal. All right, so Comey says, I need to tell the public we found these, or I need to hide it. He opted to talk about it, but the Inspector General said the two doors should actually have been labeled Follow Policy and Practice, and the other door Depart from Policy and Practice. In other words, the Inspector General has now come down on Comey for violating department policy. He should have either followed it or not followed it. It wasn't as if he had a choice to speak up or cover up. There was a policy already to deal with this. He decided to go maverick and go on his own, go around Loretta Lynch, and he has been condemned many times in this report. I encourage everyone to read it because it does prove that James Comey is a little less than his marketing and book implies that he is. Okay, thanks for joining us this week on Cal's Corner Radio Show. We'll be back next week with another episode, and we'll talk about UFOs starting next week. Thank you.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.